My name is Donna, I'm 29 years old, and I've been shaped by a father who turned my medical torment into his control. My chronic migraines demanded regular checkups, but Dad, Brian Wayne, forced his wife Christine to intrude, blaming me for resisting her presence until I banished her and dismantled his rule. The pressure crushed my health and spirit, leaving me isolated in a family that demanded obedience. This battle forged my path to freedom. Share where you're watching from in the comments, like if you've faced family tyranny, and subscribe for more tales of overcoming control. Let's journey back to when this burden began, a silent struggle against their dominance that ignited my rebellion. The weight of their expectations and my pain set the stage for a fight I didn't choose, one that would define my strength years later. The year I turned 24, my life in Seattle fractured when my parents' divorce finalized, a clean break after years of simmering tension. Mom moved to a modest apartment near downtown, her space filled with the scent of her herbal teas, while Dad, Brian Wayne, remained in our family home, a sturdy house overlooking Puget Sound, where the waves whispered a constant reminder of change. I'd just started a job as a graphic designer, my career taking tentative root with late-night sketches and tight deadlines. When Dad remarried Christine 2 years later, my chronic migraines, a relentless condition I'd battled since my teens with throbbing pain and nausea, demanded checkups every few months, sometimes with tests or treatment adjustments. Life was unsteady but manageable, until Christine's arrival turned it into a relentless nightmare. Dad's insistence that she join my appointments clashed with Mom's fierce objections, and the pressure from their combined force began to crush my spirit and health. The weight of their expectations and my escalating pain marked the start of a silent war I didn't choose, one that would shape my fight for freedom in ways I couldn't yet foresee. It began with Dad's unyielding demand. One crisp autumn morning, he called me into the living room. Christine perched beside him, her smile too wide and her perfume overpowering the room's usual woodsy scent. "Donna, Christine's family now," he declared, his voice a command wrapped in false warmth. "She'll come to your next checkup." My stomach twisted into knots. My migraines were a private agony, a battle I shared only with Mom and the doctors who adjusted my medications. "I don't need her there," I said, my voice small but firm, hoping he'd hear the plea beneath it. He frowned, leaning forward with a stern gaze. "She's your stepmom. You need her support, and that's final." Mom had warned me the night before, her voice sharp over the phone. "She's ruining your health with her meddling." But Dad wouldn't listen, and Christine nodded eagerly, her presence already suffocating. That first appointment, she chattered incessantly about her gardening triumphs, her latest casserole recipe, drowning out the doctor's questions about my symptoms. My head pounded, the fluorescent lights blurring into a haze, and I left with a migraine so severe I collapsed into bed, a preview of the torment that would define my days. Christine's intrusion grew aggressively overbearing. At 25, my next checkup approached, and Dad drove me, Christine in the passenger seat, her purse clinking with a stash of unnecessary supplies she deemed helpful. "I'll explain your symptoms," she insisted, cutting off the doctor mid-sentence with a barrage of unsolicited details about my diet and sleep. Her voice, loud and insistent, reverberated in the small exam room, triggering a migraine that sent sharp pains through my skull and nausea churning in my gut. The doctor hesitated, asking, "Is this stress-related?" I nodded, unable to form words, while Christine prattled on about family care as if she were an expert. My health took a steep decline, missed workdays piled up, my design projects sat unfinished, and the pain became a constant companion that lingered for days. Dad ignored my pleas to exclude her, saying, "She's helping you." But her help felt like a hammer smashing against my fragile stability. The strain was relentless, a physical toll that eroded my energy and left me questioning how much more I could endure. Brian's guilt trips isolated me further, weaving a web of emotional manipulation. He'd call after each appointment, his tone heavy with disappointment. "Christine loves you, Donna. Rejecting her breaks our family unity and hurts her deeply," he'd say, each word a weight pressing on my chest. I'd sit on my couch, an ice pack pressed to my forehead, listening to his lectures about blending families and accepting change. His voice a constant drone that amplified my migraine pain. Friends like Sarah, who'd once invited me for coffee and shared laughs over design flops, stopped reaching out. My constant cancellations due to worsening migraines left them frustrated and distant. "You're always busy with doctor stuff," Sarah said one day, her patience thinning into a cold goodbye. I tried to explain, but Dad's voice echoed in my mind. "You need Christine." My social circle shrank to a lonely echo, dinners replaced by solitary nights with ice packs and silence. My isolation deepening under his relentless pressure. The loneliness was a silent punishment, a void that fueled a resentment I kept buried but couldn't ignore. Christine's public complaints added a layer of humiliation that cut deeper. One rainy evening at a neighborhood barbecue in Seattle, she cornered Mrs. Jenkins, a kind neighbor who'd once brought me soup during a bad migraine spell, and lamented, "Donna shuts me out at her appointments. She's so ungrateful." I overheard, my plate of ribs forgotten as the damp air carried her words across the yard. Heads turned, eyes narrowing, and the whispers started. Mrs. Jenkins avoided my gaze, and others followed suit, their judgment a palpable force. My social standing crumbled, invitations to community events dried up, and walks to the market became a gauntlet of stares and hushed conversations. Christine's tears at these gatherings, paired with her loud complaints, reinforced the narrative of my ingratitude. Dad supported her, saying, "She's trying to connect," but it felt like a public shaming, a betrayal that stung deeper than the physical pain I carried. The damage to my reputation was a wound that lingered, isolating me further in a city that once felt like home. The family tension escalated into open warfare at home. Mom fought back with a fury that shook the phone lines, her calls to Dad a torrent of anger. "She's making Donna sicker with her meddling," she'd shout, her voice crackling with desperation. Dad retorted, "Christine's staying. End of story," his tone unyielding. I'd sit in my room, the argument seeping through the walls, my head pounding from the noise and the stress it amplified. One night, Mom stormed over to Dad's house, confronting him in the driveway under the glow of a street lamp. "You're killing her with this nonsense," she cried, her fists clenched as rain streaked her face. He stood tall, unmoved, his voice cold. "Christine's part of us now." I watched from the window, torn between their fury, my health deteriorating under the strain of their conflict. The divide widened into a chasm, a family rift that left me caught in the crossfire, my migraines worsening with each shouted word. My work suffered a devastating blow under this relentless pressure. As a graphic designer, I'd once thrived on creativity, delivering vibrant designs under tight deadlines, but the migraines from Christine's intrusions left me sluggish and unfocused. A critical client meeting slipped through my fingers, my designs were late, my vision blurred by pain, and my boss, Mr. Carter, sighed, "Pull it together, Donna, or we'll need to reconsider your role." I nodded, hiding the agony behind a forced smile, but the stress mounted with each missed deadline. Dad's insistence on Christine's presence meant more sick days, my reputation fraying as colleagues whispered, "She's unreliable," their trust in me eroding. The job I loved became a battleground, my career teetering on the edge as Brian and Christine's control tightened its grip. The loss of professional respect was a new wound, one I nursed in the quiet of my room, the weight of their dominance a constant burden. Christine's behavior turned into a relentless invasion of my personal space. At 25, she'd linger after appointments, offering unsolicited remedies, herbal teas she swore by, pressure points she claimed to master, ignoring my protests with a patronizing smile. "I know what's best for you," she'd say, her voice grating as my head throbbed worse with every word. Dad backed her, insisting, "She's learning your needs," but it felt like an assault on my autonomy. One afternoon, she rearranged my medication schedule without consulting me, convinced it was more effective, and I ended up overdosed, collapsing at home in a haze of dizziness and pain. The hospital visit was a blur. Doctors rushing, mom furious, dad defensive. My trust in my own health shattered, replaced by their meddling. The violation deepened my resolve, a spark of rebellion igniting amidst the chaos they'd created. Brian's pressure intensified at every family gathering, turning them into battlegrounds. At a Thanksgiving dinner hosted at Dad's house, he pulled me aside, his voice low and commanding. "Christine's hurt by your attitude. Accept her, or you'll regret the consequences," he warned, his eyes hard. I nodded, my head aching from the noise and tension, but inside I seethed with a fury I couldn't yet express. Christine hovered, offering pie I couldn't stomach, her eyes probing for any sign of weakness as she pressed a slice into my hand. The meal was a minefield, every bite a struggle, every glance a judgment from relatives who echoed Dad's sentiments. My appetite vanished, my weight dropping noticeably, a physical sign of the emotional toll their pressure exacted. The family unity he preached felt like a cage, and I began to plot my escape from their suffocating grip. The isolation from friends grew into a profound loneliness. Sarah, my closest work friend, stopped texting after I missed her birthday party, her silence a rejection that cut deep. "You're never around anymore," she'd said weeks earlier, her tone final as she turned away. Other friends followed, their lives moving forward while I was tethered to appointments and arguments, my social life reduced to a memory. I'd walk Seattle's rainy streets, the Space Needle a distant silhouette against gray skies, feeling the weight of their absence like a physical ache. Christine's complaints to mutual acquaintances, "She's so cold and distant," spread like wildfire, and I became a pariah in circles I once cherished. The loneliness was a constant companion, a reminder of the life I'd lost to their control, fueling a quiet fire of determination that simmered beneath my surface. My health took a severe hit from their relentless pressure. The migraines, once manageable with medication and rest, now lasted days, leaving me bedridden with blurred vision and nausea. One episode after an appointment with Christine's interference required an emergency room visit, the sterile lights and beeping monitors a stark contrast to the chaos at home. Doctors adjusted my treatment, but the stress from Dad and Christine's dominance undermined every dose. I'd lie in the dark, the pain a pulsing reminder of their intrusion, my energy sapped by the constant battle. The decline was a silent cry for relief, a physical manifestation of the emotional war they'd waged against me. By the end of that year at 25, I was a shadow of the vibrant designer I'd been. My health faltered, work faltered, friendships faded, and family gatherings turned into hostile arenas. Dad and Christine's pressure had built an impenetrable wall around me, but within it grew a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. I'd sit in my room, the city lights dim through the rain-streaked window, plotting how to end this overbearing intrusion. The pain, the isolation, the betrayal, they were forging a strength, a rebellion against the man who'd imposed his wife on my suffering and the woman who'd amplified my pain. That strength would soon erupt, a fight I'd carry forward to reclaim my life from their suffocating control. As I approached 26, the shadow of Dad's control and Christine's presence had solidified into a suffocating routine that stretched across Seattle's gray skyline. My migraines, a relentless companion since my teens, had become a secondary battle to the larger war for my independence, a fight I'd begun to nurture in silence after their initial intrusion. I'd rented a small apartment near Capitol Hill, its narrow windows offering a sliver of hope. But Dad, Brian Wayne, and Christine tightened their grip with a vengeance. I started requesting private consultations with Mom during my neurologist visits, a modest attempt to reclaim my voice, but their response was a fortress of resistance that tested my endurance to its core. Their mockery, threats, and unrelenting pressure pushed me to the brink, yet I clung to the hope of breaking free, plotting a rebellion that would one day dismantle their dominance. The plea for privacy was met with scorn. At 26, during a routine checkup at a Seattle clinic, I asked the nurse for a moment alone with Mom, my voice steady despite the tension coiling in my chest. "I need to speak with her privately about my treatment," I said, hoping to shield my vulnerability from Christine's gaze. Dad, seated across the room, let out a derisive laugh, his eyes narrowing with disapproval. "You're just parroting your mom's nonsense," he snapped, his tone cutting through the sterile air. Christine, perched beside him, clutched her handbag and let out a theatrical whimper, tears glistening as she murmured, "I only want to support you." The doctor paused, uncertain, but Brian waved him on. "She's staying, and that's the end of it," he declared, his voice a hammer against my fragile request. The session dragged on with her hovering, her questions about my medication schedule clashing with the doctor's advice, and I left with a tension headache that gnawed at me for hours, a bitter taste of their unyielding control. Brian's restrictions on my time with Mom became a calculated punishment. He began limiting my visits, insisting I spend weekends at his sprawling Queen Anne home under the guise of family harmony. "You need to include Christine in your life," he'd command, scheduling invasive dinners where she'd orchestrate the evening with meticulous care, adjusting place settings, critiquing my manners, and forcing conversations about her latest hobbies. I'd sit through these ordeals, the clink of silverware against plates amplifying my stress, my sleep shattered by restless nights replaying her critiques. One evening, after she berated my choice of water over wine, I lay awake until dawn, my mind racing with frustration and fatigue. The chronic stress seeped into my days, my hands trembling during work calls, and I began dreading these mandatory gatherings that drained my spirit and left me questioning my resolve. Christine's sabotage at work added a treacherous layer of betrayal. At 27, she began weaving rumors among my graphic design colleagues, casually dropping to Mr. Larson at a company lunch that I was unstable due to family issues. I caught her mid-sentence at a networking event, her voice carrying over the crowd, and the fallout was swift. My boss summoned me the next day, his expression stern. "There's concern about your reliability," he said, sliding a performance review across the desk. The threat of demotion loomed large, my projects dissected under a microscope, and I poured late nights into revisions, my eyes burning from screen glare. My reputation, once a badge of pride, unraveled under her calculated whispers, and the isolation at work echoed the loneliness at home. Her actions were a deliberate strike, amplifying Brian's pressure to accept her as a fixture in my life. Brian's withdrawal of emotional support left me stranded during crises. One night at 27, a migraine struck with ferocious intensity, the room spinning as I fumbled for my rescue medication. I called Dad, my voice a hoarse whisper, seeking his help, but he dismissed me coldly. "Christine's upset about your attitude. You need to make it right," he said, his tone devoid of care. I managed alone, crawling to the couch, the pain a relentless vice with no relief in sight. Another time, during a severe episode that necessitated an urgent call to my doctor, he refused to assist, insisting, "Christine can handle it," though she stood uselessly by, offering only a tepid glass of water. The absence of his support during these moments carved a deep sense of abandonment, my health suffering as I navigated the aftermath with no anchor. The emotional void was a wound that stoked my growing determination. The family dynamics turned into a suffocating vice at home. Dad's threats grew darker during these forced dinners, his voice a low growl. "Accept Christine, or you'll face consequences you won't like," he warned, his gaze piercing as Christine nodded with a smug smile. One evening, she cornered me in the dining room, her tones syrupy yet commanding. "You'll come to love me," she said, thrusting a plate of her special cookies that tasted of regret and did nothing for my pain. I forced them down, my stomach churning with resentment, a prisoner in my own family. Mom's calls became my only solace, her anger a shield against their onslaught. But Dad's control over my schedule left me ensnared, the tension a constant hum that frayed my nerves. Work transformed into a relentless battleground. The demotion threat hung over me like a storm cloud, and I dedicated extra hours to my designs, my fingers cramped from the mouse, my vision blurring from fatigue. Mr. Larson, swayed by Christine's rumors, relegated me to grunt work, data entry instead of creative briefs. His trust in me eroded. "Show you can handle pressure," he'd say, and I'd nod, my energy sapped by the effort. The late nights took a brutal toll. Skipped meals left me weak. A persistent cough from overwork settled in my chest, and my health wavered further under the strain. Christine's interference had cost me professionally, her words a poison that seeped into every corner of my career, a loss that gnawed at my sense of self. Christine's manipulative tears became a sharpened weapon. At 27, after I requested a private consultation, she burst into tears in the waiting room, her sobs drawing pitying glances from other patients. "She rejects me," she wailed to Dad, who shot me a withering look. The performance repeated, her cries echoing after each exclusion, a guilt trip that silenced my protests. One afternoon, she followed me to the parking lot, weeping. "I only want to be your family," her hands gripping my sleeve. I wrenched free, my head throbbing, the manipulation a weight I could barely carry. Her tears, sanctioned by Dad's approval, were a tool to bind me, deepening my sense of being trapped in their emotional snare. Brian's dismissive interruptions stifled my voice. Whenever I tried to express my discomfort, he'd cut me off with a curt, "It's settled, Donna." His hand raised like a dictator's decree, Christine nodding in agreement. One rainy afternoon, after a particularly draining appointment, I began, "I don't want her involvement," but he interrupted, "She's staying, no more talk." The lack of dialogue left me voiceless, my protests swallowed by his authority. I'd retreat to my apartment, the rain tapping against the window, my mind racing with strategies to break free. His refusal to listen was a chain, one I began to test with subtle acts of resistance, a spark of defiance flickering in the dark. The stress manifested in alarming ways. At 27, the chronic strain from their pressure triggered a panic attack during a work meeting, my breath hitching as colleagues stared. I excused myself, trembling, and sought a doctor's note, but the diagnosis, stress-induced anxiety, added a new layer of burden. My sleep fragmented into restless hours, my body aching from tension, and I relied on over-the-counter remedies that barely helped. Dad dismissed it as drama, while Christine offered more of her ineffective tonics, their indifference a further blow. The health setback was a stark echo of the emotional war they waged, pushing me toward a breaking point I couldn't yet name. My apartment offered a fragile refuge, but their influence seeped in. I'd sit by the window, the rain a soft curtain, attempting to sketch for work, but the memory of Christine's voice and Dad's commands invaded my thoughts. His calls, demanding I reconsider my attitude, added to the pressure. his tone a blend of anger and expectation that left me rattled. I'd hang up, my hands shaking, the isolation a heavy cloak that wrapped around me. The space I'd carved out was mine, yet their reach extended even here, a reminder of the fight I couldn't yet win. The quiet moments were fleeting, a brief escape from the storm they'd unleashed. The emotional toll weighed heavily. At 27, I began losing weight, my appetite fading under the constant stress of their demands. I'd stare at meals, the food unappealing, my stomach tight with anxiety. Friends from college, like Mark, stopped inviting me to gatherings, their silence a rejection that stung. I'd walk Seattle's wet streets, the city's vibrancy muted by my solitude, feeling the loss of connections I'd once cherished. Christine's influence, backed by Brian's authority, had stripped away my support network, leaving me to navigate this ordeal alone. The emptiness was a constant ache, a catalyst for the strength I'd need to confront them. By the end of that year at 27, I was a shadow of the designer I'd been. My health faltered with anxiety and weight loss, work teetered on the brink of collapse, and family ties strained under their oppressive rule. Brian and Christine's pressure had erected an unyielding wall around me, but within it grew a resolve I hadn't fully grasped. I'd sit in my dimly lit apartment, the city lights a distant glow through the rain, plotting how to end this forced endurance. The pain, the isolation, the betrayal, they were forging a strength, a rebellion against the man who'd imposed his wife on my pain and the woman who'd magnified my suffering. That strength would soon erupt, a fight I'd carry forward to banish her and topple his rule. The air in Seattle grew thick with tension as I approached 29, the weight of Dad's control and Christine's meddling pressing down like a storm cloud over the city's skyline. I'd endured their dominance for years, my migraines a silent witness to their overreach, but the breaking point loomed closer with each passing day. Living in my cramped apartment near Capitol Hill, I clung to the fragile peace I'd carved out, supported by Mom's quiet strength over the phone, while Dad, Brian Wayne, and Christine escalated their demands. The latest clash between my parents over Christine's unwanted presence at my medical appointments set the stage for an outburst I could no longer contain. The pressure from their relentless manipulation and blame had built a fire within me, and on that fateful evening, it erupted, shattering the fragile family ties I'd once held dear. The fallout would test my resolve, but it also marked the beginning of my liberation. It started with a vicious argument that shook the foundations of our fractured family. One rainy night, Mom called Dad to discuss my latest neurologist report, her voice crackling with frustration over the speakerphone in his Queen Anne home. "Christine's presence is making her sicker," she insisted, her words a plea for reason. Dad's response was a growl. "She's part of this family, and she'll stay." The call escalated, their voices rising until Mom shouted, "You're destroying her health for your ego." I stood in the hallway, my heart pounding, the tension palpable. Dad slammed the phone down, his face flushed with anger, and turned to me. "Your mother's poison is ruining us," he spat, his eyes blazing. The weight of their conflict pressed on me, and in that moment, the dam of my silence broke. I snapped, my voice cutting through the storm. "I never wanted Christine at my appointments," I yelled, the words tearing from my throat as I faced Dad. His jaw dropped, his usual authority faltering, and Christine, who'd been lingering in the kitchen, froze mid-step. "I've hated it since you forced her on me," I continued, my hands trembling but my resolve steel. "She's not needed. She's a burden." Dad's stunned silence stretched for a heartbeat, his face a mask of disbelief, while Christine's eyes widened, her composure cracking. The truth I'd buried for years spilled out, a rebellion against the control they'd imposed, and the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the aftermath. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Dad recovered, his voice low and dangerous. "That's cruel and unfair," he said, his words dripping with condemnation. "Christine's done nothing but care." But I stood my ground, the fire in me unquenchable. "She's done nothing I asked for," I retorted, my voice steady despite the storm within. Christine burst into tears, her sobs echoing through the house, and fled to the bedroom, slamming the door. Dad glared, his silence a promise of retribution, and the tension thickened into a palpable divide. The confrontation had unleashed a war, one that would ripple through our family and beyond, testing my strength in ways I hadn't imagined. Brian and Christine launched a smear campaign that cut deep. The next day, Dad called his golf buddies and work contacts, spinning a tale that I'd attacked Christine unprovoked. "She's ungrateful and spiteful," he told Mr. Larson, my boss, over the phone, his voice carrying through the wall. Childhood friend Emily, who'd once shared secrets at sleepovers, texted, "I heard what you did. How could you?" The isolation spread. Colleagues avoided me at the office, their whispers a constant hum, and invitations to social events vanished. My reputation, once a shield, crumbled under their orchestrated narrative, leaving me adrift in a sea of judgment. The loss of these connections was a wound, a price I paid for speaking out. Christine's public tantrums escalated the humiliation. At a family reunion in a Seattle park, she cornered me near the picnic tables, her voice rising as tears streamed down her face. "You've broken my heart," she wailed, drawing a crowd of relatives, Uncle Tom, Aunt Linda, cousins, who turned their sympathetic gazes on her. Her performance was a spectacle, her sobs punctuated by pointed glances at me, labeling me the villain. I stood frozen, the weight of their stares burning my skin, my cheeks flushing with shame. The scene repeated at a neighborhood barbecue, her cries accusing me of cruelty, and the community's pity shifted to disdain. The public shaming was a relentless assault, amplifying my isolation and fueling a resolve to fight back. Brian's financial threats added a new layer of desperation. After the outburst, he called me, his tone icy. "You've crossed a line, Donna. I'll cut you off if you keep this up," he warned, his words a guillotine over my fragile independence. The next day, he reduced my monthly allowance, a lifeline I'd relied on since moving out, leaving me scrambling to cover rent and bills. I took on extra shifts at a local cafe, my hands raw from dishwater, my feet aching from standing, the tips barely stretching to essentials. The financial strain was a noose, tightening with each missed payment, and the pressure to conform gnawed at me. Dad's control extended to my wallet, a tactic to bend me back into submission. The family rift widened with their allies joining the fray. Uncle Tom, once a neutral figure, called to lecture me. "Christine's trying, Donna. You're tearing us apart," he said, his disappointment a heavy burden. Aunt Linda echoed him at a grocery store, her cart veering away as she muttered, "You've hurt your father." The extended family, swayed by Brian and Christine's narrative, closed ranks, their rejection a cold wall. I'd walk Seattle's streets, the Space Needle a distant blur, feeling the loss of their support like a physical ache. The isolation was a constant companion, a reminder of the price of my defiance, yet it steeled my determination. Christine's guilt trips at home turned vicious. After the reunion, she'd linger in the living room during my rare visits, her eyes red and voice trembling. "I've given you everything," she'd sob, clutching a tissue, her words a dagger aimed at my guilt. One evening, she followed me to my room, blocking the door. "You owe me respect," she hissed, her tears a mask for anger. I pushed past, my heart racing, the confrontation leaving me shaken. Her emotional manipulation, backed by Dad's silence, was a trap, eroding my confidence and forcing me to retreat into myself. The home I'd once known was now a battlefield. Brian's reaction fueled the tension. He avoided me for days, his silence a punishment, then confronted me with a lecture. "Your words were vicious," he said, his face hard. "Christine's devastated." I tried to explain. "She's not what I need," but he cut me off, his voice rising. "She's your family now." The dismissal left me voiceless, my protests swallowed by his anger. I'd sit in my apartment, the rain tapping against the window, my mind replaying the scene, the rejection a spark that ignited my resolve. His refusal to hear me was a chain, one I began to break with every step toward independence. The financial scramble intensified. With my allowance slashed, I took on night shifts at the cafe, the fluorescent lights a harsh contrast to my exhaustion. The tips were meager, barely covering groceries, and I skipped meals, my stomach growling as I worked. One landlord notice threatened eviction, and I borrowed from Mom, her support a lifeline, but also a reminder of Dad's power. The debt piled up, a constant worry that shadowed my days, and the pressure to return to his favor loomed large. Brian's threat was a weapon, designed to force compliance, but it only deepened my determination to stand alone. Work became a minefield of their influence. Mr. Larson, swayed by Dad's calls, assigned me grunt work, his trust in me waning. "Prove your focus," he'd say, and I'd nod, my hands shaky from fatigue. A client complained about a delayed project, and I faced a formal warning, the stress eroding my creativity. Christine's rumors had poisoned my professional life, her words a lingering echo that threatened my job. The late nights, the pressure, the isolation, they built a wall around me, but also a strength I hadn't yet fully tapped. The emotional toll was a heavy burden. At 29, the constant strain left me with dark circles under my eyes, my energy sapped by the fight. I'd stare at my reflection, a stranger looking back, the weight of their rejection a constant ache. Friends from college faded, their silence a rejection that cut deep, and I felt the loss of a support network I'd once relied on. Christine's tantrums and Brian's threats had stripped away my stability, leaving me to navigate this ordeal with a resilience I was only beginning to understand. By the end of that month, the defiant outburst had unleashed a war. The smear campaign, the public humiliation, the financial threats, they were a triad of pain, but also a catalyst. I'd sit with Mom, her hand on mine, her quiet strength a contrast to Dad's rage, and feel a flicker of hope. The support from her, the sting of rejection, the weight of their pressure, they forged a resolve I didn't know I had. Brian and Christine thought they could break me with guilt and force, but I was done being their pawn. This was the moment I'd start to banish her and topple his rule, a fight I'd carry forward, no matter the cost. The weeks following my defiant outburst at 29 in Seattle unfolded like a slow unraveling. The city's familiar hum drowned out by the deafening silence of a family turned hostile. Dad, Brian Wayne, had been struck dumb by my declaration that I never wanted Christine at my appointments, his shock giving way to a cold, simmering rage that reshaped our fractured ties. I'd sought refuge in Mom's modest apartment near Pike Place Market, her gentle presence a lifeline against the storm Dad and Christine had unleashed. My choice to enforce Christine's exclusion from my medical care became a defiant stand, drawing fierce retaliation from their allies and plunging me into a solitary battle. The weight of their financial sabotage, personal harassment, and professional threats tested my endurance, but it also kindled a resilience I hadn't fully tapped. This was a fight for my survival, a stand against the dominance they'd imposed, and I braced myself to weather their onslaught. The shunning from Dad's wrath was a swift and cutting blow. After my confrontation, he avoided me for days, his silence a weapon that sliced through the remnants of our bond. When he finally broke it with a curt phone call, his voice was a blade. "You've chosen your side, Donna," he said, his words a declaration of war that severed our connection. I turned to Mom, her apartment a sanctuary with its faded curtains and the comforting aroma of her soups, and together we vowed Christine would no longer intrude on my health decisions. But Dad's retaliation was immediate. He rallied his inner circle, spinning a tale of my ingratitude to aunts, uncles, and old friends. Aunt Margaret, who'd once sent me handmade scarves, texted a chilly, "You've broken Brian's heart." The rejection was a gut punch, stripping away the familial safety net I'd clung to, leaving me isolated in a web of their disapproval. Brian's freeze on my inheritance cast me into financial despair. A week later, a certified letter arrived, his bold signature sealing my fate. He'd locked my modest inheritance, a trust from my grandparents, pending my reconciliation with Christine. The sudden loss of that financial cushion forced me into a frantic scramble. Rent on my apartment became an insurmountable hurdle, and I took on grueling low-wage jobs, stocking shelves at a downtown grocery by day and washing dishes at a diner by night. My hands chapped and raw, my back aching from the labor. The tips were a pittance, barely covering utilities, and I skipped meals, my stomach growling as I tallied meager earnings. Debt mounted with overdue bills and an eviction notice tacked to my door, the pressure to cave to Dad's demands a constant whisper in my ear. His control had extended to my survival, a calculated move to force my submission. Christine's uninvited visits shattered my fragile peace. One exhausted evening, as I slumped onto my couch after a double shift, a sharp knock jolted me. There stood Christine, her smile strained as she barged in with a basket of healing herbs, ignoring my protests. "I'm here to mend things," she chirped, her cloying perfume triggering a migraine that left me reeling. She lingered, rearranging my sparse furniture, her voice a drone about forgiveness, until I pleaded for her to leave. The harassment persisted, unannounced drops of wilted flowers, notes slipped under my door with passive-aggressive pleas, each visit a violation that frayed my nerves. My health deteriorated, migraines intensifying into days of blurred vision, and I installed a deadbolt, the $150 cost of further strain. Her persistence was a relentless assault, a campaign to break my spirit, backed by Dad's tacit approval. A work investigation, fueled by Brian's influence, endangered my career. At my graphic design firm, Mr. Larson summoned me with a somber look. "We've received allegations about your conduct," he said, sliding a dossier across the desk. The report, subtly orchestrated by Dad through a board connection, claimed I'd falsified project timelines due to emotional instability. The accusation was a fabrication, but the scrutiny was real. My emails were audited, my designs dissected. I spent sleepless nights defending my work. My apartment, a chaos of coffee cups and crumpled sketches, the exhaustion a heavy cloak. Colleagues distanced themselves, their whispers of troublemaker a constant hum, and the threat of termination loomed, a professional guillotine over my head. Brian's manipulation had infiltrated my livelihood, a new battlefield in his quest to dominate me. The pressure from their allies intensified my solitude. Uncle Tom, a figure I'd once trusted for impartial advice, cornered me at a bus stop, his voice stern. "Christine's trying, Donna. You're tearing the family apart," he said, his words a weight on my chest. Aunt Linda reinforced this at a pharmacy, her cart swerving as she muttered, "You've shamed Brian." The extended family, swayed by Brian and Christine's narrative, formed a united front, their rejection a cold barrier that left me stranded. Old college friends like Mark stopped replying to my messages, their silence a rejection that cut deep, and the Seattle community I'd known turned its back. I'd walk the city's wet streets, the Space Needle a distant smudge, feeling the loss of their support like a physical ache, a loneliness that steeled my resolve. Christine's guilt trips at home took a menacing turn. During a rare visit to Dad's house, she ambushed me in the living room, her eyes red and voice quivering. "I've given up so much for you," she sobbed, her hands gripping my wrist. "You owe me peace." I yanked free, my heart pounding, but she pursued, her tears morphing into a hiss. "You'll regret this." The emotional manipulation, sanctioned by Dad's silence, was a trap that eroded my confidence, forcing me into a corner of my own home. The space I'd once shared with him was now a war zone, her presence a relentless assault on my sanity. Brian's threats grew more menacing, adding to my burden. After the inheritance freeze, he called again, his tone a frozen blade. "Reconcile with Christine, or you'll lose all ties," he warned, hinting at legal action to reclaim family assets. The financial pressure surged. Bills piled high, and I sold a cherished painting from Mom to stave off eviction, the loss a pang of sorrow. He suggested disowning me formally, a move that kept me awake, my mind racing with visions of homelessness. The stress triggered more migraines, and I leaned on Mom's limited savings, her support a lifeline but also a reminder of Dad's power. His control was a noose, tightening with each threat, yet it fueled my determination to resist. The work investigation deepened into a personal inquisition. Mr. Larson assigned a compliance officer to monitor me, their shadow a constant reminder of the stakes. "We must verify your integrity," he said, his tone clipped as I pleaded my case. The officer's reports, shaped by Dad's subtle influence, questioned my professionalism, and a client presentation collapsed, my voice faltering under pressure. I spent weekends rebuilding credibility, my apartment a wreck of half-finished designs and cold coffee, the exhaustion a crushing weight. The threat of termination grew, my career, a source of identity, teetering on collapse. Brian's reach had turned my workplace into a proving ground, his influence a specter I couldn't shake. Christine's harassment escalated with eerie persistence. One night, she left a voicemail, her voice syrupy yet ominous. "I'll visit until you accept me," she vowed, the threat lingering like a shadow. The next day, she appeared with a gift, a framed photo of us I'd never posed for, demanding entry. I refused, my hands trembling. But she loitered outside, heard the knocks a drumbeat, until a neighbor called the police. The disruption sparked a migraine, my health a fragile thread, and I filed a restraining order, the legal fees draining my resources. Her relentlessness was a violation, a campaign to unravel my resolve, supported by Dad's complicity. The emotional toll carved deep scars. At 29, the relentless strain left me with gaunt cheeks, my energy sapped by the fight. I'd gaze into the mirror, a stranger with shadowed eyes, the weight of their rejection a constant ache. Old coworkers, like Sarah, ceased acknowledging me, their silence a rejection that pierced my heart. I'd walk Seattle's rain-soaked streets, the city's charm dulled by my solitude, feeling the loss of a support network I'd once treasured. Christine's tantrums and Brian's threats had stripped away my stability, leaving me to forge a path with a resilience I was only beginning to comprehend. The financial scramble turned desperate. With savings gone, I took a third job at a call center, the headset pressing against my temples, the monotony a stark contrast to my creative past. The pay was dismal, and I pawned a childhood bracelet from Mom, the loss a stab of guilt. Another eviction notice arrived, and I relocated to a cheaper, mold-ridden flat, the damp walls a symbol of my struggle. The debt was a shackle, binding me to a battle I hadn't chosen, and the pressure to yield to Dad's demands was a persistent hum in my mind. The social isolation deepened with their influence. A former mentor, Mrs. Carter, avoided me at a networking event. her silence a confirmation of Dad's sway. "Brian says you've changed," she murmured, turning away. The rejection spread to casual acquaintances, their distance a cold wall, and I felt the loss of a community I'd once navigated with ease. Christine's public displays and Brian's threats had dismantled my social fabric, leaving me to rebuild with a strength born of necessity. By the end of that month, the isolated stand had crystallized my resolve. The financial ruin, the personal harassment, the professional threats, they were a triad of pain, but also a catalyst. I'd sit with Mom, her hand on mine, her quiet strength a beacon, and feel a flicker of hope. The support from her, the sting of rejection, the weight of their pressure, they forged a determination I didn't know I had. Brian and Christine believed they could crush me with their tactics, but I was done being their pawn. This was the moment I'd start to banish her and topple his rule, a fight I'd carry forward, no matter the cost. The crisp autumn of my 30th year in Seattle ushered in a fragile calm, a gentle reprieve after the tempest that had raged since my confrontation with Dad at 29. Mom's apartment near Pike Place Market, with its creaky wooden floors and the soft hum of the city below, had transformed into my sanctuary, a place where I pieced together a life after banishing Christine and toppling Brian Wayne's rule. The echoes of his financial sabotage and her harassment had dulled, but the scars lingered like faint etchings on my soul. I'd secured a promotion to senior graphic designer at my firm, my bold designs now gracing local billboards, and enrolled in evening classes for a health advocacy certificate, a dream born from my own battles. Yet, the past wasn't finished with me. Vicious online attacks from Dad and Christine's allies surged, a digital storm that tested my hard-won strength. This was my sovereign rise, a triumph sculpted from adversity, and I was resolute in rising above their lingering shadows. The journey had been arduous, a crucible that had forged me into someone unyielding, and I embraced it with every fiber of my being. My career blossomed into a beacon of pride. At the design firm, my latest project, a vibrant poster series for a Seattle arts festival, earned accolades from clients, my creativity rekindled after years of suppression under Dad's thumb. I'd spend late nights at the office, the soft glow of my monitor a silent partner, sketching concepts that mirrored my resilience, bold colors and defiant lines. The promotion brought a modest raise, allowing me to ease Mom's financial burden with rent contributions, a small act of gratitude for her steadfast support. Evening classes at a community college introduced me to health advocacy, my coursework delving into patient rights and community support, a passion ignited by my own struggles with migraines. Professors like Dr. Ellis praised my analytical essays, and I envisioned leading a nonprofit to empower others facing medical tyranny. The workload was relentless, balancing design shifts, lectures, and scarce sleep, but it laid a foundation for a life I governed, a stark contrast to the chaos Dad and Christine had enforced. Mom's presence was a steady rock in my turbulent sea. Her apartment, cluttered with her knitting projects and faded family photos, became a haven where we'd share tea and recount my progress. She'd listen as I described work triumphs, her smile a rare light piercing the darkness of my past. One rainy afternoon, she handed me a worn journal of my teenage sketches, her eyes misty. "You've always had this strength," she murmured, her voice a balm. The bond we'd rebuilt, tempered in the fire of Dad's rejection, was a cornerstone of my recovery. We'd cook together, simple dishes like lentil soup, her kitchen a space of healing, a refuge from the torment they'd inflicted. Her support was a quiet force, a steady hand that fueled my determination to leave their influence in the dust, a legacy of love they could never taint. The online attacks erupted with a ferocity that stunned me. In late 2023, I launched a LinkedIn profile to network for my advocacy goals. posting about a community health workshop I'd organized. Within hours, notifications exploded. Trolls, likely egged on by Dad and Christine's circle, had targeted me. A post from a shadowy account unearthed old family disputes, branding me a selfish daughter who abandoned her kin. Comments flooded in. "Heartless traitor! Ruined her father's peace!" The venom was a cruel echo of their past manipulations, and my chest constricted with the sting of their reach. I'd believed the confrontation had buried this, but their allies had resurrected it with a vengeance. A digital assault I hadn't braced for. The harassment was a new frontier, a trial of the fortitude I'd fought to reclaim, and I steeled myself against its bite. The doxing heightened my vulnerability to a terrifying degree. One chilling night, a troll comment on X exposed my apartment address, captioned with a menacing, "This is where the betrayer hides." My breath caught, the threat a cold hand on my spine as I stared at the screen. I reported it frantically, but the damage was swift. Unfamiliar cars idled outside, and a package with a handwritten note arrived. Its words a veiled threat I couldn't ignore. Mom and I packed in a panic, moving to a safer, cheaper flat in a quieter Seattle suburb, the relocation a whirlwind of cardboard boxes and fear. The cost drained my meager savings, forcing me to defer a semester of classes, and the constant vigilance, checking locks, peering through curtains, wore me thin. The exposure was a profound violation, a reminder of their power to haunt me, yet it hardened my resolve to stand unbowed. I fought back against the digital onslaught with fierce determination. At work, I collaborated with the IT team to fortify my online presence, deleting personal posts and locking accounts, but the attacks persisted with ruthless tenacity. One evening, a manipulated video surfaced on a fringe forum, edited to depict me shouting at Dad, captioned, "Ungrateful offspring." I reported it, my hands trembling with rage, but the platform's response crawled at a snail's pace. Dr. Ellis offered mentorship through the ordeal, his guidance a beacon, and I poured my fury into a class project on digital abuse, earning a standing ovation. The validation was a shield, but the troll's relentlessness tested my limits, a shadow that loomed over my hard-earned successes, pushing me to dig deeper into my resilience. My career advanced with a momentum that defied the chaos. The Arts Festival campaign clinched a regional award, my name etched in the program a public testament to my vindication. I pitched a health advocacy initiative to my firm, proposing a series of posters for patient support groups, and they greenlit it with enthusiasm, a stepping stone toward my nonprofit vision. The workload was staggering, client meetings, design revisions, class assignments, but it constructed a legacy of my own design. Mom celebrated with a modest cake, her pride a quiet joy, and I felt the burden of their past control lift, replaced by a purpose they couldn't undermine. The success was a triumph, a bedrock for the future I'd battled to secure, a life crafted from the ashes of their dominance. The family rift faded into a distant echo. Dad and Christine hadn't reached out since the doxing, their silence a hollow victory tinged with relief. Mom overheard from a mutual friend that they'd relocated to a quiet suburb, their influence waning like a dying ember. One gray afternoon, I spotted Uncle Tom at a farmer's market, his glance fleeting but devoid of the warmth I remembered, a sign of their enduring narrative. Mom's brother, Uncle James, called, his tone cautious. "Brian's still bitter," he admitted, "but I see your struggle." I thanked him but kept my distance, embracing Mom's love and my brother's support, Kevin, 32, with his steady advice, and Mark, 26, with his lighthearted encouragement, as my true family. Their rejection had wounded me, but it liberated me from their guilt-laden traps, a peace I'd fought to claim. The cost of my stand was a profound sacrifice. I'd lost Dad's approval, Christine's intrusions, and the extended family's embrace, leaving a void that echoed with their absence. My career and education were my lifelines, but the doxing added a relentless strain, a shadow over my progress. I'd walk Seattle's rain-drenched streets, the Olympic Mountains a distant promise on the horizon, feeling the weight of their rejection, but also the growth it had spurred. Therapy with a counselor, Ms. Harper, became a sanctuary, her sessions unraveling the guilt with gentle persistence. "You're not responsible for their choices," she'd say, and the words slowly took root. Dad's early pride had morphed into control, but Mom's unwavering faith rebuilt me where he'd torn me down. This was a rise forged in unyielding strength, a testament to survival against all odds. If I could share one piece of advice, it's this: don't let family dictate your worth. Enforce your boundaries fiercely. Brian and Christine sought to mold me into their image, wielding my pain as a weapon, but I learned my value isn't theirs to assign. Stand tall against their pressure, even when they deploy power, tears, and threats, because your life is yours to shape. I waged that war, and it set me free. The path to break their hold was my most grueling victory, a lesson in claiming my own destiny with unwavering resolve. The lesson I carry is clear. Liberation comes from overthrowing imposed control to craft your future. I sacrificed Dad's love, Christine's meddling, and family ties, but I gained a self I honor. The migraines, the harassment, the doxing, they sculpted me into someone who defies domination with grace. Victory wasn't merely banishing her, it was constructing a life where their influence couldn't penetrate. I'd repeat it, not for vengeance, but for the woman I've become, the one Mom always believed in, the one who stands tall in her sovereign rise. This is my legacy, a monument to resilience, and I embrace it with pride. Now, I turn to you, my community of strength. I've shared my rise from pain to power, a journey of defiance and renewal, and I invite your stories. Have you overcome domination to forge your own path? Share your tale in the comments. I read each one, and they inspire my resolve. If this journey resonates, like and subscribe for more narratives of triumph. Let's build a network of resilience, one courageous story at a time. Thank you for being here, for listening with open hearts, and for reminding me I'm part of something greater. I'll see you in the next video, where we'll continue to rise together.